Heyo, this is the Armchair Critic, back with another Disembodied commentary. This time talking about the 49th film to win the Oscar for Best Picture. A little movie you may have heard of called Rocky. And if you want to follow along with me on your DVD, just press play now. And you should see Leo the Lion. The classic Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer logo. Followed by the logo for United Artists. United Artists was part of this series up through Rocky V. Rocky Balboa was distributed by Columbia Pictures. And by the way, through this commentary, I have not heard Stallone's DVD commentary for this movie, so if I repeat anything he said, I apologize. It's coincidental. And the movie opens with Rocky's fight with Spider Rico, and it is a fight. And I think what's illustrated here, something that the story of Rocky will pick up later, is that, as you can see, he has no boxing technique, really. It's just kind of a brutal guerrilla fight. Now later on, Mickey mentions that you fight like a damned ape, and I think this scene illustrates it. This is a movie all about you hear things or you see things and they pay off later. This movie's very big on that. See, they're just pounding on each other. There's no finesse here at all. It's brutal. It's sweaty. Ugh. And all through this movie, Rocky's the word that follows Rocky around is bum, and it starts with his corner man here. It says you fight like a bum. Well, it is a bum fight. It's basically. I like how this is photographed. It's grimy, and it's kind of trying to get into the world he exists in, the world of just kind of guerrilla fighting. And you notice they fight, they punch each other, but then they get into this hugging thing, this sort of brawling thing. And there's the headbutt. And now I don't know anything about the I don't know much about boxing, but I know the WBA rules against headbutting is, I think you lose 2 points. I don't know if that counts here. I do know that half the stuff they're doing in this fight in the professional ring, wouldn't fly. I think Rocky fights best by motivation. You notice he gets really angry when he gets headbutted. It's always about, kind of what he wants. And see, continue this thing with people calling him a bum. It's like he went in there and he won, and some lady in the audience still calls him a bum. It's like, just And after all of that, this is kind of strange. After all of that, when we come to this scene where he's sitting in the locker room. And we see that it's all for nothing. We see that it's not a lucrative. This club fighting thing is not a lucrative position. I mean, for heaven's sakes, he makes $40. for all that. Even the loser makes 17, and he doesn't get to come back for a couple of weeks. That sucks. Get your brains bashed in, you only get $40. This first part of the movie is very, very character centric. It's not really even about boxing. I think that's really the most we'll see of boxing until the finale. This is more about Rocky's world. And he stops by this pet shop, which will pay off in a few minutes. Excuse me. But like I say, it's more about the world that he lives in. And I think the point of this movie is the people we write off, the people we just kind of dismiss, have lives too. Everybody has something. Everybody has a life, has a mind, and has dreams. And he passes this corner where the guys are singing. This is a real song, by the way. I found this on YouTube. It's on the album. I remember when I went to Philadelphia as a kid, I was kind of disappointed because I didn't see a bunch of guys around a burning trash can, singing. I think of how this would have been handled nowadays is that he would have gone straight from the gym, or straight from the boxing ring right to his home. And here we follow him home. I think this is the Kensington neighborhood. Excuse me. In North Philly. That's the information I could find. And he makes it home, and his, I just love that machete sticking out of the wall. He makes it home, and you can see he doesn't exactly live in the lap of luxury. One thing to notice is that in this kind of squalid little apartment that he's got, there's one bit of color, and that's this lamp here in the foreground over the turtle bowl. And there's a reason for that. Red is a prominent color in this movie. Well, I'll explain later, but this sort of little arena in this surrounded by all this kind of filth, I guess. Not to judge a man's apartment, but he moves Moby Dick over into the little shrine there. I love this line. If you guys could sing or dance, I wouldn't be doing this. The machete is a coat hook. I didn't really get this at first. I just noticed this recently. Why exactly he's talking about more moths than flies. And he has this sort of introspective moment. It's like, where did my life go? This picture of him when he was 8. Obviously he played football too. It's just kind of this introspective moment, maybe fueled by what everybody's been telling him. You're a bum, you've been wasting your gifts, and you had talent, and you're nothing. They don't realize that hurts him, I remember remember something. It reminds me of something Stallone said. He said, "Boxers outside the ring are very sensitive guys." He said when you see them cry or when you see them play with their little kids, he said they're very human. Their pride is, I don't know if this applies to all boxers, but their pride is just under the surface. Now we go back to this pet shop. And it's like, why is he so interested in it? And there's the reason. He likes Adrian. And Adrian always represents a little bit of color in his little world. And so it's kind of like this little shrine. That little table with the turtle and the Moby Dick is that little shrine that he has to Adrian. And the moths and flies pays off here because he was practicing that joke. This movie is all about details. Little details in his life. This movie and the second one are very big on that. The other sequels kind of lost that a little bit. That cage unnerves me. That big old dog in that little bitty cage. That's Butkus, by the way. That is Stallone's dog. His disappointment that he doesn't get to spend a little bit of time with her. He's a sensitive guy, Now we get to see what he does full time. And it's a little alarming, to be honest. It's like, what is he doing in a stockyard? Everybody knows him. This is apparently a very small neighborhood because everybody knows everybody. He knows everybody's, brothers and sisters and dogs and cats. This is his full-time job. He's a debt collector. But he's not a bully about it. I like that. I like this. He says, just give me the money, But he's not a bully about it. I ain't emotionally involved, Now, he's been ordered. Here's the strange thing. He's been ordered to break Bob's thumb, but he doesn't. Now, my question is, what would have happened? How would the audience's reaction to Rocky have been if he had broken Bob's thumb? What would? How would that have changed the texture of the character in the audience's mind? If he had done something like that. There's a couple of decisions he makes in this movie that if he'd have made just a little bit, changed things just a little bit, it would have completely changed the texture of the character. Now this is interesting. Is it... Every time Gazzo seems to pick him up or drop him off, it's always just kind of in the middle of nowhere. I don't know anything about the loan sharks, but it's just like, just pick him up in the middle of nowhere, Like he picks him up on this train bridge, and later he just kind of drops him in the slum. And this is interesting, if you contrast this with his other job, he's a boxer and then he's a debt collector. It's like his job essentially is violence, but Rocky's not a violent guy. Of course he does this job just to pay the bills, but he uses what he's got. Doesn't have the brain, so he uses the muscle. He tells Adrian later, I don't have the body, I don't have much of a brain, so I gotta use my body. This actor, by the way, is Joe Spinell. He was Willie Chi-Chi in The Godfather. He's the one that shot one of the gangsters in the... is this the one that shot the guy in the revolving door. Now, if you'll notice here, he pulls out an inhaler. Apparently, Joe Spinell had asthma, and I guess you could call that an ad-lib. It just kind of happened, and it was kind of going into an asthma attack right there. And it's interesting that he's got asthma and he's smoking, but the director, John Avildsen, left it in. Rocky's a guy of considerations. Mr. Gazzo doesn't like that. And again, he just kind of drops him off in the middle of nowhere. This is a movie very, very much about loneliness. Because you notice, there's not really anybody in his immediate world. He doesn't seem to have any close friends. He doesn't seem to have any family. Of course, he gets those later, but this is just about a guy from the neighborhood. That's how he's seen. Just another guy from the neighborhood. Just not a bum from the neighborhood. I noticed that sign over there on the wall that says no kissing. What is that about? Has this been a problem in this gym? See, again, he doesn't get any respect. He can't get in his locker. And I noted that I said earlier that everybody calls him a bum. So Mickey's throwing him out of his locker, and he puts his stuff on the rack over here, and they call it Skid Row. Just kind of furthering that they don't think much of him. And here we meet Mickey. Or he goes out to meet Mickey, I should say. Mickey's very rough with him, and I to be honest with you, because Mickey's not in the movie very much for the first half, but what's interesting is that he kind of dismisses Rocky as a has-been and a bum and all of that, but you always sense that he's kind of a stern father. It's tough parenting. I'll dismiss him to kind of toughen him up. Because if he didn't, then he wouldn't care enough to tell him, you fight like a damned ape and all of that. He wouldn't care enough to do that. even later when he kind of lays it on the line for him, there is a little bit of concern underneath, all of the dismissiveness. By the way, the guy who plays Dipper is an actor by the name of Stan Shaw. He's been in a lot of stuff. He was in Daylight with Stallone. He was in Harlem Nights and all kinds of stuff. And every time he feels kind of bad or dejected or kind of dismissed, he always comes back to Adrian. I love this scene where he asks her out on a date. It's just kind of like a shy kid, I love that shot through the cage. She's this trapped little bird. It fits with another. It fits with another scene later. Later in the film. It again, it has a payoff. See again, these colorful little birds. There's always color. Color always represents Adrian for him. And Adrian is all about, the character of Adrian to me is all about getting out of that little cage. Talia Shire said that she based the character on Laura from the Glass Menagerie. She had a physical disability that left her with painful shyness. And it's a character. She's a character that grows. Adrian is. She is not the same person that she was at the end that she was at the beginning. She wants to talk to him, but she doesn't have much to say. See, he's got a little bit concerned. Even a bum sitting outside, he'll bring him in from the cold, Because, earlier he establishes with Adrian it's a cold night, and then he brings this bum in. Rocky's speech pattern is interesting. Everybody makes fun of it, but if you notice in this movie, he has a different speech pattern with everybody. His way, his manner of speaking with everybody is kind of friendly and and with Adrian his voice gets really soft. With Mickey it's like a son coming to a father. And when he talks to Paulie it's kind of loud and kind of brash. I guess we all do that. We don't even realize that we have different speech patterns. I'm kind of indignant about the fact that Paulie thinks that somebody starts drying up past 30. I'm over 40 and I'm not drying up. Stallone said that I think somebody told me that Stallone wanted to get out of this bathroom because it really did stink. Because I think that line was ad-libbed. And here we see Apollo Creed for the first time. on television. He's basically an analog for, as you know, he's basically an analog for Muhammad Ali, and I like how Rocky responds to this comment he makes about the bartender calls Creed a clown, and Rocky's like, hey, he went all the way, he made something of himself. Who are you to judge? You know. I like this line. Stay in school. Be a lawyer, be a doctor, carry a briefcase. Be a thinker, not a stinker. Rocky's a little less lovable in this one than he would become in the later films. In the later ones, he would kind of soften up, I guess, after he gets married and has a career. But in this one, he's a little less lovable. He tells people off, and he's still good-hearted, but he tells people off. And he's also really wanting to help. Here he meets Marie, and I've never seen an actor or a writer who's so into the world it creates. Stallone is very much about this world, because he brought this character back for Rocky Balboa. And he's got Rocky here trying to make a difference in somebody's life, trying to tell Marie, don't hang around with idiots, be something, don't hang around with these people, don't get a reputation for being a whore. And of course she's not listening. I like yellow teeth, that kind of thing, It takes a cigarette. But what's interesting is everything he's telling her would come true. Everything that he's telling her would come to pass, or everything he's warning her about, I should say. I guess he's thinking maybe in years to come she will look back on him, and she'll look back on it and think, I remember Rocky, he saved me from this, or he warned me about that. But of course she also dismisses him and screw you, creepo. What's interesting is that when she says this, he doesn't say anything back. His response is just kind of defeatist. It's like, yeah, who are you to give advice, creepo? He's a sensitive guy. Even in Rocky Balboa, he remembered that. It's like, yeah, I remember the good insults. Again, illustrating people dismiss him. And here we see Apollo Creed in the flesh. We saw him earlier. This is our first real scene with him. Oh, and I should point this out. The fellow over on the right by the window with his arms folded, I believe that's Michael Dorn. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I'm about 90% sure. I think that's Michael Dorn. But anyway, what's established here with Apollo in this film is that he's a great champion, but he kind of sees boxing as a promotional stunt. not as a sport, and that kind of signals that he's gotten bored with it. He's a lot like Rocky in the third movie. He's taken to fighting tomato cans just to have his face out there. I love Apollo's journey in these first three films. We see the arc of the character. In this movie, he's just kind of a cocky champion who thinks he can win without trying. In the second movie, he's kind of nursing wounded pride over what happens in the fight with this movie. And in the third one, he becomes more thoughtful, more mature, and he sees a lot of himself in Rocky. He's really the series' most accomplished character, which is why it really disappoints me what happens with the fourth one, because he kind of goes back, he kind of reverts back. It's almost like in Rocky 4, it's like he didn't learn anything. See, he's a promoter. You know, his mind is more on promotion than it is on boxing. And again, we get back to Mr. Gazzo dropping him off, and he talks about excuse me. They do a little business, and then he talks about Adrian. And he seems to indicate excuse me, pardon me, he seems to indicate that he has some kind of inside information, as if, you know, he knows something. You know, I hear things, he says. And but as we've seen, everybody in this neighborhood knows everything, and everybody in this neighborhood is kind of in everybody else's business. You know, Rocky knows everybody's brother and everybody's sister and everybody's cousin and mom and dad, and, you know. So it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to say that, yeah, he yeah, he knows. I hear things. Gazzo's not uncaring, I don't think. Here's an interesting thing about Apollo in this movie that I just noticed recently, is that Apollo never trains in this movie. We never see him doing any kind of actual work until right before the fight. You know, when he's getting himself ready. And with Rocky, he picks Rocky out of a book. He doesn't see the tapes. He doesn't see any of that stuff. He picks Rocky out of a book. And he doesn't even care that he's left-handed. He's just more interested in his name. And, you know, that's where his mind is. I'm always surprised that he won in this movie because of that. But and by the way, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm giving spoilers right and left. Again, like last time I talked about Poltergeist, is, you know, if you haven't seen the movie and you're listening to commentary, why? Rocky walks home with Paulie. Adrian doesn't know he's coming. And this movie's all about callbacks. It's like there's rarely anything that happens that doesn't have some kind of callback like this. Marie is back on the corner. She didn't listen to a word he said. I guess that's how kids are. I may have been like that too, I don't know. There's something I always love is when you have a character that seems to be one-dimensional, and then something will signal who they were. Like that picture on Rocky's mirror of him playing football. Seems to signal something, just a little something else. And here, if you look, there's a picture on this dresser of Paulie in the Navy. And the reason that's significant is that it's just a little extra to the character. It's not absolutely necessary that we know that, but it's just a little bit, just a little something extra. It gives the character a little bit of history, a little bit of something else. I noticed she's got a little turtle ceramic on the table. That's interesting. Because he bought turtles from her. I've always wondered about, worried about Paulie. Where did his life get sedentary? But we know that it wasn't always like that because we know that he was in the Navy. And here's where he throws the turkey out the window. Go eat it in the alley. It sounds mean, but to be honest, and by the way, he eats this turkey leg. It's like it's a thing at Germ Factory. It wasn't finished cooking. But it sounds mean and all of that he throws the turkey out the window. But you know what? It gets her to go out on a date with Rocky. Probably could have handled it differently, but it's Paulie. Rocky's always very shy around. He's just again, his manner of speech changes from the way he talks to Rocky, and then here he's standing at the door trying to get Adrian to go out with him. I can't help but think that in another movie or in a modern movie, that all of this character stuff would be gone. It would be more about the boxing, as this series would become later. This is all about characters, and building ideas and building characters and things like that. Getting to know people and getting to care about them. That's what this movie's all about. And that's how we came to like Rocky. This outfit that she puts on is I always thought of it as a disguise. It's like, I'm gonna go out with you. But I will make absolutely no effort to try and look attractive. I put on this ugly hat, this ugly coat, and these horn rim glasses, but I will make absolutely no effort to try and look attractive. I've always seen a date as kind of a job interview. Maybe it's an effort to try and push him away. I have no idea. I can't really. I don't know. And so we get to this date scene, which has been viewed by many people as one of the best, one of the greatest date scenes in movie history. I would agree. There's a lot of simplicity in their union. I think it's special because it's about what happens. It's not about what happens to them, but it's about the people involved. I know I keep hammering on that, but that's what this movie's about. It's about people. The whole movie's about this relationship. Yeah, I mean, it's a boxing movie, but I think it's a love story between two people who don't really have anything to hold on to. Because, like I said, Rocky doesn't have any friends. He doesn't seem to have any friends, doesn't seem to have any family. This scene in the ice skating rink was originally written as a conversation in a restaurant with a lot of dialogue, and they threw that out and decided to have them doing something, because on a date you do something. You go to a movie, and there was going to be, they decided to have them go ice skating, have a lot of extras. And then they realized that extras cost money, and this movie was low budget. I think it was just over $1 million. And so they came up with this idea of having the skating rink be closed. So the great famous date scene in Rocky came about not because of artistic genius, but out of saving money. The result, I think, is a scene that is absolute simplicity. It's just them. I think other people would have been distracting. He talks a lot, and if you've ever been a lonely person, you know that whenever you're around somebody who will listen, you'll talk your ear off. And it's so much, this scene is so much about two people who fit together, because she doesn't talk and he doesn't shut up. It just kind of fits. I think I can relate to that. Obviously, I'm a person who likes to talk. And we learned that Rocky's been fighting for a long time. And the moment that they click, I said, he talks and she doesn't say too much. The moment they click really is when he says, "My old man told me, you don't have much of a brain, so you better start using your body." She laughs and she says, "Yeah, my mother says the opposite, I don't have much of a body, so I better start using my brain." They just fit. It's like just two pieces of a puzzle that just fit. And that's smart dialogue. I love that. This scene is very, very much about what people are to each other. Two lonely people on an ice skating ring, on the ice, holding each other up. That's what lovers do. They hold each other up. That's a beautiful scene. That's, you can always just pinpoint the moment when they click. The dialogue is just so beautiful. And here he's walking her home. And what's great about this scene is that she's doing something that essentially nobody's ever done before. She's seeing Rocky as an individual. He talks about himself, he talks about the fight game. But the beauty of this is the more he reveals about himself, the harder it is for her to dismiss him as a creep or a bum. She sees Rocky as he is. There's no false front here. It's just, he talks about himself, but there's no overinflated, I got a fancy car and all of that. There's no fancy this or that. It's very matter of fact. He's just a guy. He sees Rocky for what he is. He's not a gigolo. He's not a swinger. He's just a guy, And she listens. That's one great thing about Talia Shire's performance is she's always listening. She's not just a lot of actors are just waiting for their line. She's comfortable with him, but then she reaches his doorstep, and it's just kind of, I've always wondered, because, I say she listens, but I've always wondered, she hears him talk about, how much he hurts and what he does and all of this. He's not forcing her to go upstairs. I love that. I love that hand. It's she goes upstairs into his world, and it's, climbing those steps, reluctantly. It's so wonderful. Very tentatively. And she realizes that he doesn't, have any kind of gigolo pad or anything like that. This is not a come on. But one thing I notice is that she's listening to him talk about how much he hurts, and how my whole body's like an open wound and all of that. And I think she's wondering, should I continue with this guy? Because you have to ask, a man whose world centers around what he does with his fists, his violence, in the boxing and in the debt collecting, what's he like in real life? What's he like? What is he like when he gets angry? Does he start throwing his fists around, and is he aggressive and mean? He fights in the boxing ring. He fights when he's collecting debts. But what's it like when he gets home? That may be part of what is keeping her from really approaching him. I always love it when he makes her laugh. See, she's kind of sizing him up a little bit, Is he a family man? What do the pictures tell me about him? Because there's always things that people don't tell you. And of course she would be nervous being in somebody's apartment. And also, there's also something else too, is that she may see something that we don't. That we don't yet see. there is, you don't see it yet, but there is a very large knife sticking out of this mattress, this old mattress he's got hanging on the wall. And that may be kind of a that may be a little unnerving. It's like, earlier you saw the machete that he uses for a coat hook. Yep, there it is. She looks up at it, but I always wonder if she's not looking at that knife, And you notice she didn't make any effort to remove what I call the disguise, the sort of anti-arousal disguise. And he tries to tell her, it's like, I'm not going to ask you to do anything you don't want to do, and it's... And then he takes off the disguise. Now he removes the glasses, and then he takes off the hat. Because I think Rocky clues in why she's wearing all this stuff. Of course, it's cold outside, but it's also... She is very beautiful. And he doesn't want her to be uncomfortable. He's very, very slow to he's very, very slow to approach her. Now there is when he starts kissing her, Paulie asks him later if they're having if they're having sex. Is he nailing my sister? And again, like the scene where he doesn't break Bob's thumb, it's like, how would the audience have reacted if Adrian and Rocky did have sex on screen? We don't know. We don't know if they did or not, and it's okay. It's okay that we don't know. But how would it have changed the texture of these characters? Now, this scene where they kind of crumble to the floor, as I say in this movie, it's always about, one thing will come back to, things will come back around. Remember, Mickey later says women weaken legs. I think that plays into this scene. See, what I love about that is that when you get down to it, and they're kissing each other, it's like you note how most people are in modern movies. People like to attack each other. I've never figured that out. It's like two people feel a passion for each other, and they feel like they've got to attack each other. It's like, throw each other around the room when they're about to have sex. There's nothing sexy about that. Excuse me. And I don't like that. That's it. I guess it's supposed to look good on camera, but it just looks silly to me. It's much easier when it comes slowly. And again, here's that argument. This is a famous clip. They love to show this clip. When Mickey lays it on the line for him. You had the talent to become a good fighter, and instead of that, you became a leg breaker for some cheap second-rate loan shark. If Mickey were completely dismissing him, then he he wouldn't care enough to tell him that. Which is why when he gets the opportunity, he comes back. I don't know, maybe Mickey's just engineering like a form of reverse psychology or something, I don't know. But, like I say, he's kind of seems to be unknowingly or knowingly engineering some form of tough parenting. So here he goes to see Miles Juergens, the fight promoter. And I love that outfit that Juergens has got on. It looks like something out of the 30s or something. Even his hair, you know. But you can see that Rocky's clearly nervous. I think something in Rocky, I don't, maybe I'm reading this scene wrong, but I think Rocky knows why he's here. And it's not just for sparring. I know he looks at him with a little bit of surprise, but I think there's something that tells me he knows why he's here. And he has this instinctive reaction to say no. And we think back to what he told Adrian about how he feels after a fight. You can imagine, as bad as he felt after fighting Spider Rico, somebody like Spider Rico, how he would feel about being in the ring with the heavyweight champion of the world. You know, when Rocky talked about, you know, your whole body hurts, you know, your body's like an open wound, you know, and you can see that fear in his eyes. It's like, what kind of damage is this guy going to do to me? He just doesn't look all that surprised. He looks afraid. Popular legend, I don't know this for 100% certainty because the information I keep getting goes back and forth. But the popular legend says that Stallone based this story on the fight between Muhammad Ali, who was champion of I believe it was 73. That between Muhammad Ali, who was heavyweight champion at the time, and Chuck Wepner, who was known as the Bayonne Bleeder or the Bayonne Brawler, because he was from Bayonne, New York, and they fought together. And I'm not sure when it was. It was sometime in the early 70s, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Ali was offered something like $1 million, and Wepner was offered like 10 grand. It was contracted to get like 10 grand. And that fight was held in Richfield, Ohio. And Wepner went all 15 rounds with Ali. And in the ninth, actually knocked the champ down. And that was almost unheard of. And for the remainder of the fight, Ali got really, really aggressive. He broke Wepner's nose, he cut his eye, and knocked him down at the end of the 15th. Ali won by a TKO, or a technical knockout. And just like this movie, the champ won, but he didn't beat him. And that seems to be the origin of this story, because, you know, it's gone back and forth about whether or not that was true or not, but the similarity really can't be ignored. Stallone spent years writing this script, and it changed. He kept changing it. He changed the characters. I think at one point he said, "He make the character of Apollo Creed Jamaican." It's like that means I got to go back and change all the dialogue. I hate to say this, but I think Paulie may be one of the kind of the fulcrum of their relationship. Earlier. Earlier, he kind of pushed them into having a date. And here he kind of he kind of gets belligerent and pushes him out the door. And I think after they started dating, she opened up. That's what people do when they're really in love, is they start opening up. Notice she's lost the glasses and she speaks up a little bit more. They open up to each other. And this is a movie very much about who they are before and after they get together. It's really one of the best love stories I've ever seen. And I said, Stallone said boxers are very sensitive. This scene illustrates it. He said, yeah, the stuff on TV. He said, yeah, that does bother me. What they have together is really beautiful. As I mentioned before, everybody kind of wrote Rocky off as a loser in a lost cause. What's nice is that when he gets a chance to fight Apollo, the people who really know him want the best for him. Like here, Gazzo gives him $500. He can sense something special in him. And same, just like Mickey. Excuse me. And he doesn't call him Mr. Gazzo, he calls him by his first name. Kind of a something approaching a friendship. Now Mickey comes up these stairs. Now here's what's interesting. We spent several scenes in Rocky's apartment. I had no idea these stairs were outside his door. He just thought he walked right in. This is kind of an interesting reveal. That when you go in the door, you go up the stairs. Now, I know that doesn't mean anything, but I just thought that was interesting. Gazzo had his moment to give Rocky his best, and now it's Mickey's turn, but to be honest, Mickey kind of has to crawl. He's been putting Rocky down and threw him out of his locker. Earlier he told him he was wasting his life and his talents. Now he has to crawl back because he wants to manage him. Actually, turtles don't make good soup. If you've ever had turtle soup, it tastes like mud. And Rocky just kind of has this look, because he knows what Mickey's going to ask him. He just kind of has this look like I really don't want to talk about this. Scene has interesting plugs from Morton Salt at KFC. Yeah, he's been putting Rocky down. he threw him out of his locker and told him he was wasting his life. Now has to come crawling back because he wants to manage him. What I think Rocky misses, as I mentioned before, is that he saw something in this young kid. Even when he was putting him down, he's approaching him with tough love. But I think we were set up for this. Earlier he told Adrian that, that stuff on TV, he said that really hurt. And it kind of signals that Rocky does kind of hold a grudge. I guess that knife kind of symbolizes, you put a knife in my heart, so, with all that stuff he said. This scene really hurts because what their relationship will become. And it really illustrates something about fighters that I've always suspected, and that Stallone said in an interview with Howard Stern, that boxers are very delicate. I'm not saying this of all boxers, but he said that boxers are at their most interesting outside the ring, which is what this movie's about. It's not about the boxing inside the ring. It's about the life they live outside, because boxing is a metaphor for life. That boxers, when you see them cry or when you see them play with their kids, and that's what I take from that. And what I take from that essentially is that boxers are very prideful. The sensitivity is just under the skin, and we see that a lot in Rocky, especially in this scene. And we see it even more in Apollo in Rocky 2, when his pride takes a beating and he has to come back and prove himself. This scene right here, Mickey says, I want to take care of you and make sure that the stuff that happened to me doesn't happen to you. Again, the father figure. And that's basically signals what happens in Rocky 3. When Rocky finds out that Mickey's basically been setting him up with lesser fighters because he didn't want him to get hurt. And here he says something that becomes sort of a continuity error later. When he says, I'm 76 years old. Right there. Later, spoiler alert, later in Rocky 3, when Mickey dies, his headstone actually says he was born in 1905. But if you count backwards from here, he was born in 1900. I know it doesn't mean anything, but of course, if you follow the timeline of this series, it gets really screwed up. Because Rocky 3 leads into Rocky 4. Rocky 4 leads into Rocky 5. So by Rocky 5, you still believe it's 1982. It gets really confusing because in Rocky 5 he has a teenage son, and in Rocky 2 or Rocky 3 he has a son who's about 8 years old. So it gets really, really confusing. God, the wounded pride from both of them is just floating in the air. And according to Stallone, this little rant here was actually improvised. I don't remember him ever being like this in the sequels. Of course, after this movie, he kind of gets what he wants, but I don't remember him being this angry, except maybe in Rocky 3. But this scene has a great payoff. It's like he's been hurt, and he realizes he's just hurt Mickey. It's all about wounded pride. This scene is all about wounded pride. I notice when he catches up with him, Mickey kind of stumbles back like Rocky's going to hit him. I'd love to know what he said to him. You know, he shakes his hand. But I'd love to know what he said to him. And now begins the second half of the movie, the boxing part. This movie is one half love story, one half boxing. I know from getting up early in the morning, this is... it sucks. Especially when it's cold. This is the famous raw egg scene. This is disgusting. I have no idea if this really, if eating raw eggs like, or drinking raw eggs like this is really worth anything. I know I'd be more worried about getting like salmonella or something, but I don't know if this really is. 5 raw eggs he puts in this glass. I don't know if this really does anything, or if this is really... Oh, that's disgusting. Ugh. I don't know if that has any nutritional value whatsoever, but that's just disgusting. I gotta look that up at some point. Do people in training actually do that? Let me know if you know. Does drinking raw eggs like that really do anything? What I love is that his training in this movie begins slowly. In most movies, or in almost all of the Rocky sequels, the training begins with the triumphant music. Here it just starts like it would in real life. This movie's all about, real life. It starts like it does in real life. It starts very slowly. Even the music is very slow. Music is underplayed. Rocky's not really powerhousing like he would in the other films. There's nobody chasing him. It's not pumped up at all. I like that. I love this scene on the steps. We come back to this many, many times in the series. I actually think Rocky IV, I could be wrong, but I think Rocky IV is the only time we don't come back to these steps. That is the Philadelphia Museum of Art, by the way. A lot of people assume it's a courthouse. And like I said, they'll come back to this many times in the series. And this is where all those triumphant poses come in. Here he's just in pain. If you've ever started an exercise regimen, you know this. This is where Mr. T challenges him in Rocky 3. This is where Rocky 4 ends, and I think this is where Rocky Balboa ends. No, Rocky Balboa ends in the cemetery. Spoiler alert. I think. I'm gonna try to do commentaries through all the Rocky movies eventually, but I haven't. I've seen them all, but I haven't been through them recently. So I'm kind of going through them one at a time here. I think of all the iconic images in the first Rocky movie, this is the most famous. It's Rocky in the meat freezer. And there's some Paulie's leading him into this confrontation, about whether or not they're having sex, whether or not he's having sex with Adrian. Of course, there's the question. Of course, Paulie's protective of her, but does he really have the right to ask? He says, she fills gaps. He says, what's gaps? These two have different ideas about what gaps mean. He says, you ball in her. For Rocky, gaps is personality. Gaps in personality. We've seen that firsthand. What I love about this scene is that the idea of hitting the beef to train happens by accident. It's not just suggested. See, Paulie hits it, and then Rocky gets an idea. And I have wondered if boxers actually do this, or if it's just a movie gimmick. So I did a little research, and I found out that it's unconventional, but it's not unheard of. Turns out that Joe Frazier used to train like this, and from what I understand, is apparently he invented it, or at least made it famous. Paulie says he's breaking the ribs, but I'd be more concerned that he's breaking his hands. It's difficult to imagine anyone else playing Rocky Balboa other than Sylvester Stallone, but if you can believe it, the studio did everything in its power not to cast him. For this part. Stallone said that every actor in Hollywood was considered for this role. It was James Caan and Nick Nolte and Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, and even Ryan O'Neal, if you can believe it. Stallone said, I think they even tried to train Monkey before they considered me for the role. Truth be told, those are good actors, although I've never been really a big fan of Ryan O'Neal, obviously. But I think what he has that they would have been missing is the upfront vulnerability. And that's the key to the character, his sensitivity. He's not a wimp, but there's a need in him that's eating him up to get out. And see, this scene right here, I can't imagine, this scene where he apologizes to Adrian. I can't imagine another actor doing this. I can't see it. Okay, coming up here in this first training sequence with Mick is the line I referred to earlier, where Mickey says, women weaken legs. And Rocky's kind of stuck between his training and wanting to be with Adrian. We saw that in the earlier scene, that scene when it kind of hurts, when he kind of pushes Adrian away. She starts getting amorous and he pushes her away, and it kind of hurts her feelings. Women weaken legs. See, now people want to come and see Rocky. That pet shop dame. There he says, women weaken legs. Okay, now I mentioned bright colors. There's always Adrian is that bit of color in his world. Remember the lamp that was hanging over the turtle bowl that he bought from Adrian at the pet shop? Here she's in a red coat. And you remember their first date when she wore the glasses and the hat. Now she's trying to look attractive for him. He's brought out the colors in her. So she's brought out the colors in him. And of course Butkus is out of that cage. I love that hat. But she is the color in his world in that red coat. Kind of signifies, it kind of calls us back to that lamp that was hanging over the turtle bowls. It was like in his apartment he had that little shrine to her. And at the end, we'll see her wearing, during the boxing match. Well, we'll get there. But Paulie's trying to get a little bit of publicity, trying to get him on television. Paulie's trying to turn Rocky into a cottage industry. Of course, I don't know if the news people just came down, or if the news people came down, or if Paulie called them. But this scene is important because it establishes how Apollo sees this fight, and also kind of sees it from the standpoint of what happens later. In the series. And again, this establishes that Apollo doesn't really take this fight seriously. And in this scene, you've got Rocky on television, and he'll do a demonstration. He does a demonstration with the side of beef, but Apollo won't even look at it. Rocky's not very camera friendly. And again, you see in this scene that Apollo's more interested in his barber than he is in the fight itself. And this kind of parallels what happens in Rocky 3 with Rocky's fight with Clubber Lang. He goes into it, he doesn't take it seriously because he kind of sees it as a gimmick, not a real challenge. And it's like Apollo, he doesn't even bother to check out the competition, he doesn't watch the tapes. And So it kind of comes back around, and I think Apollo sees in that film what he did and what he did here. In fact, I think the only time he's ever actually looked at Rocky was in that interview, that television interview we saw earlier. You know, where they were announcing the fight. I like how they establish a time here, because it starts, you know, in late November, and then it goes. Of course, the fight is. It starts in late November, and the fight is on New Year's Eve. So you kind of get a timeline of how long Rocky's actually got to train for this. Talking about Paulie, and he comes in the door and he overhears. This is the scene where Paulie tears up the house with a baseball bat. Kind of a jerk. Later in the series, he just kind of becomes the comedy relief. What's interesting is that Paulie was originally written to be a woman. In Stallone's original script, Adrian had a loudmouth Jewish mother. So as I'm watching him tear up the house with a baseball bat, I have to wonder how this scene would have been played out. How this scene would have played out if the role had been written the other way. And you know, there's a reason to think that Paulie's temper tantrum here is nothing new. It's been kind of a repeated pattern over the years. You know, he's turned himself into a drunk, and he's angry, and he's loud. This is something that, this confrontation with Adrian is something that has been brought out over the years. You feel that Adrian's getting out aggression that's been building for years. He's been putting her down, telling her she's a loser and she's drying up and all of that. And as I mentioned, excuse me, this is why Adrian's probably as shy as she was when we met her. She spent a lot of time in her life crumpled in a corner, trying to get out of Paulie's way. But it may be also why she's so reluctant, why she was so reluctant during the first date to get too close to Rocky. You know, she knows he's a fighter. She knows he's a leg breaker for Gazzo. His career aspirations center on violence. So maybe that explains her trepidation. That she's afraid he's going to have a hair trigger temper just like her brother. And here she asks him if he needs a roommate, and I think that signals that she's fully accepted. And if you noticed, we just passed it, but if you noticed that scene in the pet shop earlier where we were looking through the bird cage, and in that scene, if you go back, she's sitting next to a bird cage and it's empty. Rocky's brought her out of her trapped little cage. I don't know if that was intentional, but I love it. That little signal there. This man here that Rocky's meeting is a real professional boxer, Al Savini. He, I think he was a real cut man. Now, I should tell you that in preparing for this commentary, I did a little kind of half-assed homework on boxing, and I learned a few things. I had no idea what a cut man was, and of course, we just saw he's meeting the cut man, and he's the guy responsible for treating lacerations to the fighter when he goes into the corner. Basically, when you're fighting, he's your doctor. And you'll see that later in the film when he says, "You got to open my eye." And the guy takes a knife and he cuts open the eye because it's swelled up and he can't see. And finally we get to the montage. And I have long suspected that this montage is what made this movie a hit. The music, the tone. And is that Gazzo's car on the right there? But yeah, I've long suspected that this scene was what made the movie a hit. It may have been the music, I don't know. It's exhilarating. The scene is exhilarating. It's big. It's what we've been waiting for. And I think this scene really sets a precedent, because after this, all through the 80s, montages were in every third movie that you saw, even if the movie didn't need it. You know, whether it was sports related or driving or changing clothes, there was a montage in everything. And I don't know if Rocky actually created the montage, but that's you know, you can suspect that it started here. You know, I don't think this started this kind of montage, but I definitely know it didn't. But I can imagine that it made it popular. We get multiple shots of Rocky fighting, but again, none from Apollo Creed. So you start to believe that Rocky may actually win this thing. And again, if you're listening to this commentary and you haven't seen the movie, you know why? Just like I did with my Poltergeist commentary last week, I'm throwing spoilers right and left. I love that ship coming in. Now we go back to the famous stairs, and this time Bill Conti's score is so great. I know the album was just as popular as the movie. I think he's standing right where his statue will be. God, you gotta feel good after that. That'll pick you up. I love the beard on the Santa beard on Rocky Marciano. And Rocky's starting to get pressed now, but he's scared to death. You feel nervous for him. I mean, this is the biggest moment in his life. And he goes out to just kind of walk around and clear his head. And you sense, you know, here's the scene where he goes to the empty arena. And you would imagine that Rocky's never seen this before, in the flesh, so to speak. You know, this a ring this big, because we've seen the, shitholes that he boxes in. And he's never seen anybody like this. You know, as Obi-Wan Kenobi says, you've taken your first step into a larger world. It's like, you know, out of the gutter and into the real, you know, out of the gutter and into the glitter, basically. I always wonder if this actor had a stroke. His mouth is kind of turned, you know, kind of to the side. I wonder if he's just got a wry mouth or something. He died just before, just right around the time that Rocky 2 came out. He is scared to death. I love that image of, you know, that long shot where we see little Rocky in front of gigantic Apollo on that banner back there. That's got to feel intimidating. And Mr. Juergens, a moment ago, told him, you know, just give us a good show. And I think what he misses is that for Rocky, this is not a show. You know, for Rocky, it's like this is my life. This is not a show. This is not a stunt. And he comes back home. And he's, I don't really want to make light of Stallone's writing in this film. It's beautiful. You know, this scene where he says, I can't beat him. But this is kind of where he lays it out for Adrian. And the goal here, the goal all along in this thing is he has no intention to win. He just wants to go the distance and prove that he's not just some useless bum that everybody said he was. You know, I mean, there in that very first scene, that woman yells at him as he's leaving the ring, you know, you're a bum. And we've seen how sensitive he is to criticism. It's beautiful. It really is. And yet, like I said, I don't want to take his writing, I don't want to make light of his writing or his beautiful script, but when I step back and I examine the entire series, it's hard to really avoid the fact that this beautiful speech takes place in the same continuity that will later give us Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, a robot, and a super Russian. It just sort of clouds the moment, you know. I can't, just... And it's, so you kind of have to section this movie off. Of course, I can't really section this movie off because, for me, the ones that really, really, really get to the meat of the Rocky character, if you were to separate them, would be probably this one and the second one and then the last one, the Rocky Balboa, because these three films are so interlinked, especially the first two. I can't get to the end of this movie and not go into Rocky 2. In fact, I may watch Rocky 2 immediately as soon as I'm done with this, because it's just, they're so linked. It's like when I get to the end of this story, I always feel like it's not done, even though I don't think this was ever intended to have a sequel. And that beautiful scene there that I just made light of was where he makes that speech was, I believe, was a last-minute addition. I could be wrong about that. See, this is the closest to training that we'll ever see from Apollo. It's also the most serious that he is in the movie until he gets knocked down. And again, Rocky's wearing red. You know, he wears a red robe for this. Whenever Red is in Rocky's circle, Adrian's inspiration is with him. I know that sounds lame, but it's kind of unavoidable, you know. And there's some indication, and of course she's wearing a red hat. Red just seems to be his connection with Adrian. It's just something I noticed. I love these little and it makes sense that she stays in the locker room, or she stays in the dressing room during the fight. I mean, she doesn't want him. I mean, obviously she wouldn't want to see him go out there and get his brains bashed in. Stu Nahan is in a lot of the Rocky movies. I can't remember how many exactly. He's passed on now, but Paulie took the $3,000 he got from the advertising and he bought himself a date. That's a foretelling line when Stu Nahan says he's captured people's imagination all over the world. That is exactly what this movie. That is exactly what he did with this movie. This character is so well written, so beautifully written, that I mean, he's become an icon, the little man. This movie at the time, and if I said that he was serious and that Apollo was serious in the locker room, it is not true here because he comes out dressed as George Washington. And by the way, did I mention he's not taking this fight seriously? Yeah, that's gone here. He's kind of doing the same thing he does in Rocky IV, you know, with James Brown and the Broadway musical number. I guess when you see him in a goofy costume, that's a signifier that he's going to lose. See, this is more something that you would see in a wrestling match. And coming up is a cameo by the late Joe Frazier. But Rocky became an icon. When this movie came out, you have to remember this movie came out in 1976 during the bicentennial, and there's all kinds of bicentennial imagery. You're seeing one now as he's dressed as Uncle Sam, but he's not taking this seriously at all, not even a little bit. But when this movie came out, it came out in 1976. It was after decades of problems, after decades of Vietnam and civil rights and political scandals and Watergate and all of that. It was just a very, very unhappy period. And I think by the time this movie came along, people wanted something to feel good about. That the little man could still win, that he could still matter, that he could still be something. And I think this movie gave people that. These shots of the crowd are very grainy. I have a feeling they're stock footage. But yeah, it happens all through history. You see the history of films, I should say. The right movie comes along at the right time. There's the late Joe Frazier. Actually, there were supposed to be a lot of there was supposed to be a lot more boxers in this, that were supposed to show up. But Frazier lived in Philadelphia, and he's the only one that showed up. I don't think anybody really believed in this film when it was made. Certainly the studio didn't believe in it. Excuse me. And I don't remember what movie it was in, but the coming up here, they're gonna mention that Apollo's nickname is the Master of Disaster. But I don't remember what movie it was in. But later, we get the full run. I looked him up. It's the Master of Disaster, the King of Sting, the Dancing Destroyer, the Prince of Punch, and my favorite, the Count of Monte Cristo. I don't remember what movie that was in. I think that was in Rocky IV that they mention all of his nicknames. And Apollo says, "Put your hands up." Said, "Put your hands up, chump." And that's the same thing he says to Ivan Drago in Rocky IV. And if you see in this scene, Stallone's not a big guy. He's about as tall as I am. He's only about 5'6". He's a small guy, physically. And you can see Apollo smiling. He's still, even in the midst of the ring, he's still not taking it seriously. I don't think the fights in this movie have what the later Rocky movies have. Is that this movie tells a story with the fight. Excuse me. But Apollo's kind of joking around, and and Rocky knocks him down. And that's that's the moment nobody expects, Excuse me. Nobody expected that, least of all Apollo. And I love this moment when they show him and he's just looking around. It's like he's been embarrassed. It's like, wait a minute, this jump is in here for real. I think he suddenly realized his mistake. Then we go back. He kind of gets him in a bear hug, and it goes back to the Spider Rico fight. He kind of falls back into his club boxing habits. Now I'm going to compare this. I'm going to dare to compare this with the fight in Raging Bull. Now, obviously, that fight was better because it was more cinematic, with the camera tricks and the sound effects. But I think this one's better at telling a story. It's not just a lot of editing. We're actually invested in what's going on here. And what's more, we feel the fight itself. In Raging Bull, it was amped up with a lot of animal sounds and black and white, which is great. Here it's a little more grounded in reality, and we feel the hits that these guys are taking far more realistically than we did in the later Rocky films, where the punches were amped up to sound like jackhammers or a baseball bat against a Naugahyde couch. This one's more of a blood, sweat, and tears. See, now Apollo's taking it seriously. And see, I mentioned that and then that line right there where Apollo says, "Give the people something." He still sees it as a show, even though he's fighting his heart out. He still sees it as a show. But as many times as I've seen this movie, something in my heart of hearts still thinks Rocky can win this. I don't know. I guess it tricks me into thinking, maybe he has a chance. When they start with the music and then Adrian comes out, Rocky struggles to his feet. This movie won the Oscar for Best Editing, and I think this scene may be why, because you see the passage of time. I don't know how long an average boxing round lasts, but you feel the weariness on both sides. And it's not like, Rocky's just taking all the punishment. No, there's punishment on both sides, because they're both determined to win. Round 13, for heaven's sake, And you keep thinking, Rocky, put your hands up. And in the second one, he has a detached retina, and Apollo keeps going for that eye. So you kind of follow it. I mentioned many times that the second one is so intertwined with this one. They are, in my opinion, two sides of the same story. A continuation of each other. What started here is finished in Rocky 2. I think you could have ended it with Rocky 2. He's not going down. He's got something to prove. I don't know. Would you have given it? Would you have gotten back up? And they drag him back to the corner. And this scene always makes me a little queasy. When they Rocky says you got to open my eye, and his cornerman cuts him, and this goop pours out. That always makes me a little queasy. And Apollo's got broken ribs. This fight just hurts, And in most boxing movies, at this point, they would still be jumping out, and taking swats at each other. But here, God, you can feel the weariness. You know, they're both beaten down, and I think they both want this to be over. This is painful, you know. But they still have the fortitude to keep going. That's amazing. Wow. I love how this is put together. You know, you could easily just do a lot of editing that just kind of, you know, suggests things, but this one, you feel like you've been all the way with them. And here's where you can tell the movie never had any plans to have a sequel. Apollo says there won't be a rematch, and Rocky says don't want one. Nobody ever really thought this movie would be a success, and of course, it won 3 Academy Awards and Best Picture. And Stallone was nominated for Best Actor, and I think he would have won if Peter Finch hadn't died. Peter Finch won the Oscar for Network. That scene where he says, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore," that's pretty much the only thing we remember from Peter Finch. We remember a lot from Stallone. Where might his career have gone if he'd won Best Actor? And here's the thing. The movie's wrapping up, and it's not about boxing. It's not about the match. It's about Rocky's fears that Adrian has left. And here you'll see coming up, the movie ends on a freeze frame. And I remember Stallone explained that. He said that Rocky goes the distance, and he still has Adrian. This is the best moment of his entire life. This is the moment he will always remember. But after that certain point, and there's the freeze frame, the moment begins to deflate, and that's why the air kind of goes out of the moment after that. It's like he rises and it reaches a pinnacle, and then after that it kind of goes out. You know, the moment starts to kind of fade. So the moment, that freeze frame, captures that moment. It's like it stopped there. You know, just his highest triumph. Because, you know, obviously this was never meant to have a sequel. But originally the movie was supposed to end when Rocky and Adrian meet outside. But he decided to kind of let the ending hang on that moment. And I've always said you can't stop there. You know, like I said, Rocky 2, this and Rocky 2 are so intertwined. You have to go directly into the sequel. It just never feels finished for me at least. Well, that's the first Rocky, and I hope you've enjoyed watching it with me. I hope I haven't bored you too much with my constant jabber. Join me next time, and I'll be talking about a different kind of hero. Next time I will be talking about Spider-Man. That's next time, and until then, don't keep the comments to yourself. See ya.